Awesome. Well, it looks like everybody's kind of trickled in. Hopefully you all can hear me today. Welcome to our Going Out of State and WUE presentation brought to you by ARROW, the Association of Regional Representatives of Oregon and Washington. We're really excited for you all to join us today. We're just going to be going over some information about what it looks like to going out of state, some benefits of going out of state, how to search for colleges that aren't in Oregon and Washington, and some differences between those. And then we'll also be going over the WUE program, so the Western Undergraduate Exchange Program, as well as some other out-of-state scholarships. So we're really excited that you all could join us today. Before we get started though, a little bit of tips and tricks for Zoom. I'm sure by now you all are very familiar with how Zoom works, but I wanted to let you know what we're going to be doing here today. You'll see at the bottom of your screen a Q&A feature. So throughout the presentation, if you have any questions that were about the information we're covering, go ahead and throw a question in the Q&A. We'd love to answer those either live during the presentation, or we'll hold off and have some questions at the end as well. You'll also, on the chat feature, we might be sharing some links with you today that'll be helpful for you throughout the presentation as well. Before we get started though, I should probably introduce myself, and all the panelists will go ahead and introduce themselves as well. So my name is Brittany. I am a senior regional admissions counselor with Boise State University, and I cover students covering the Western Washington and Western Oregon. Lillian, you want to go ahead and take it next?
Hi, my name is Lillian Dotran. I'm the regional recruiter from the University of Arizona. So I cover the Pacific Northwest. So I cover Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Hawaii, and Alaska, but I am based in Washington.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Allison. I'm the Portland Regional Admissions Counselor for Eastern Oregon University. So I'm based in Portland, and that's my primary territory, but also all schools and cities along Western Oregon, Western Washington, California, and Nevada. Those are my primary travel territories.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kaylee Mattel, and I am the Regional Recruitment Coordinator for the University of Minnesota Twin Cities, and I cover the Pacific Northwest and Northern Washington, as well as Alaska, Montana, and I am based in Northern California.
Hi, my name is Adrienne Loveland. I'm the Assistant Director of Admission for the University of Wyoming, and I cover the Pacific Northwest, just Washington and Oregon and Colorado, and I'm based in Denver, Colorado.
Awesome. So at this point, we'll go ahead and dive in. So Kaylee, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. So to start, I know a lot of questions that you may have is why look out of state? Why go out of state for a university, for college, when you're in your college search? So there are typical reasons why students want to go out of state and reasons why we promote going out of state so much. And some examples are listed here, especially in the Seattle region. I know that impacted majors is a concern. A lot of the computer science, the engineering majors, some of them you're not technically guaranteed to graduate in that degree if you get accepted at the university. So that's one important thing to look for if there's something of interest in fields that tend to be impacted in your area, that there might be other schools out there that impacted majors aren't as big of a thing as they are here on the West Coast. Another area along that would be specialized programs. So there might be something of interest like golf management program. There could be a retail merchandising program. There could be an agriculture program that might be more geared toward the Midwest versus here on the West Coast. So different areas of the world, of the nation, definitely have more success with certain programs, or might actually have programs that your side of the country might not have. Affordability, of course, is another thing. The cost of living can be completely different in the Midwest versus in a city on the West Coast or in California, or it could be a little bit more expensive. So that's also a thing to keep in mind. So I know we think of in-state tuition a lot, but we also need to think about scholarships, especially out-of-state scholarships, and what we're going to talk about later on with the WUE program. So affordability is definitely another important factor. Sometimes it's harder to get scholarships when you're going to an in-state institution. So the cost versus going in-state and out-of-state, you might find actually might not be as big as a gap, or it could potentially be cheaper going out-of-state. So there's a lot of things when it comes to that. And of course, graduating in 4 years goes along with that impacted major and the affordability. Look for schools that you might be guaranteed to have that 4-year graduation. So you're not wasting another year or spending time at a university for another few years, spending tuition money and the cost of living money. So all of those are very important. Internships then while you're in school. So locations where they might have companies you're interested or the career path you're interested in. For example, in the Twin Cities where my school is located, Minneapolis, there's 19 of the Fortune 500 companies located there. So we are an excellent school when it comes to internships for our students. So if that's something important to you to get that hands-on experience, definitely looking elsewhere and looking at different cities. I know Atlanta has huge opportunities such as the Coca-Cola company, or if you want to go to the East Coast, lots of big company, Johnson & Johnson. So depending on what field you're interested in, different locations might have more of that specialty and that hands-on opportunity for you. And a great thing to keep in mind is students can always come back. You can always go back to where you're living. If you love the Pacific Northwest, you love Washington, Oregon, wherever you're located, you can always come back. You're only in school for 2 semesters typically, even during the colder months. If you're going to the Midwest during a winter time, you can still come home during that time and not have to endure it for as long, which I know Minnesota, we do tend to have winters there. So you're always going home, but you're at the same time gaining experience and gaining that independence. So when you're looking for colleges out of state, or even if you're looking in state, we have a couple buzzwords to kind of think about, to notice and pay attention to kind of find the best fit for you. The first thing we have up here is student to faculty ratio. And that explains and shows the access to professors, and students ask, or student size can, or the size of a class can depend on different factors, whether it's your first year, if it's a large intro class. So I always tell students, regardless of the faculty to student ratio, it's always going to be a pyramid. So you might have a lot more students in your first year's classes going on into the second, third, fourth year, but they do tend to get smaller. However, student to faculty ratio is important because it kind of shows the average of that. So it's basically how many students per professor, what's the accessibility to professors. You also want to keep in mind too, are professors available? Do they have office hours at the institution you're looking for? Do you feel like you can really get that one-on-one time? Acceptance rate. So acceptance rate means how many accepted out of how many applied. So this can kind of show you if a school is competitive, or if it might be a school that you're interested in, but you might want to have another school also that you're applying to based on the competitiveness. It also can show how great academics can be. If there's certain programs that show the acceptance rate is a little bit smaller versus how many apply, that tells you a lot too about the institution. So acceptance rate is good, especially when you're planning for schools and applying to them, making sure you apply to the right amount and having those schools, the safety schools, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it kind of shows you too how competitive those programs are to get into. Then of course, retention rate, graduation rate. So first year students, if you come to a university and then you decide to stay a second year, that's your retention rate. That's important because it kind of shows, you know, students going to a university, do they tend to stay at the university? Do they like it? Is it providing them with the success and the tools that they need to continue on into that graduation rate? Then the graduation rate, of course, is how many students are graduating from your institution. And that's important because when you want to go to school, the main goal is ultimately to graduate. So when you're looking at 4-year graduation rates, I believe the average typically is displayed in 6-year. So keep that in mind when you are looking at institutions. It's actually, the average is about 59% when it comes to undergraduate graduation rate. So that's not a bad number when you're looking at schools. I know a lot of them will say it's about, you know, the 70 to 82% range. And keep in mind that is usually a 6-year graduation term. So if you do see lower numbers than that, make sure you're looking at, is it a 4-year graduation rate? Is it a 6-year graduation rate? Because that can definitely differ. And if you're wondering why that number may be seeming a little bit lower, everybody has different goals. There's different timelines in mind, different competitive programs like we mentioned. Some students take internships. Some students get more hands-on opportunity. They might take gap years. There might be transfer students coming in. So a traditional age student, the timeline you might want to be looking at is the 4-year graduation rate. And then of course, merit-based scholarships, private scholarships. So looking out of state, you definitely want to see, you know, how much money can you receive coming to an institution, since if you are going to a public institution, you're going to be paying the out of state. Or if you're going to a private institution, you'll be paying the same amount of tuition, but it might not be as low as your in-state tuition for where you're located. So merit-based scholarships are automatic scholarships that are given to you. You're not applying for them. They're usually based off the pool of students for that year, and they're usually based off your academics. There are private scholarships that you can also apply for at universities, so see if schools have those available, because those are going to be, of course, a big factor when it comes to where you're going to go to school, what your plan is, and especially for looking out of state. You want to see if schools have those opportunities for you to get that additional funding and to, of course, help the affordability when it comes to going to an institution. Then SuperScore. If you're not familiar with SuperScore, that typically requires or applies to your SAT or ACT score. Another thing to keep in mind this year as well is, are schools accepting ACT, SAT scores? Are they test optional? Not every college is going to be taking the SAT, ACT score this year as well. And I know a lot is changing right now and continually to change. So when you're applying, if you're a senior this year, make sure to look at what test optional means and how that's going to look on your application. If that means to send your score anyways, to not send your score if you think it's going to be held against you, and make sure you know each school's policy with that. But when it comes to SuperScore, not every college will SuperScore an SAT, ACT score. And what that means is taking the best score from each section on one of the tests and taking the average of those best scores. Not every college will SuperScore, so they'll either take your best score from a single test date, or again, like I said, some schools are doing test optional. You might not even be sending your SAT, ACT score this year, so that can vary. But again, every school is different. Make sure you're looking at their policies, especially right now during COVID-19 and everything going on, because you want to make sure that you're utilizing and benefiting from either sending your test score to a school, or if you think it's going to hurt your application process, to not send the school or to not send your score. And then I mentioned how when you're looking at schools, you kind of want to pick the different things that really matter to you versus what you could live without. So of course, going to any institution, whether it is in state or out of state, you have to have the negotiables versus the non-negotiables. What could be good for a school for somebody else might not be a good school for you. So if you have a neighbor that you know is going in state or out of state and they're going for these reasons, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the best school or that might be the best school for you. If you feel like you'd work better at a smaller institution, that's a huge thing to know. If there's a major that you're interested in, that's of course one of the most important, because that's what you're going to study for the next 4 to 6 years. Location is huge too. What part of the country do you want to be in? Do you want 4 seasons? Do you want to be, maybe a plane ride away? Do you want accessible airports? Do you want to be completely on the opposite side of the country? Is there a specific climate or environment that you want to experience? Is there different internship opportunities that you're interested in that maybe different locations of the nation are providing you? Like I mentioned, if you feel like you'd be better at a larger institution versus a smaller institution, if you're not sure, I always tell students there's so many ways you can make a larger institution feel small that you not necessarily can do with a smaller school. But either way, for a large school versus a small school, there's no disadvantage. It's however you feel your best fit would be. If you feel like you would learn better in a smaller class environment, then you should maybe look at more of the smaller schools versus a large public school with 40,000 students. Then of course, student life. Student life is a huge factor when it comes to going to school. You're not going to be sitting and studying all day. It's not going to be solely about academics. It's about being involved and getting in a community that you feel a part of. So what that looks like to you. If you want a school that has a lot of school spirit and has a lot of clubs, activities to get involved in, then that's another area that you would have to look at when it comes to your college search. Or if none of that really matters and you kind of just want to make sure they have a rowing team, or if you want to have a chess club or something. So make sure that you keep in mind your areas of interest as well as your hobbies and activities, because you are going to be living at this campus for the next 4 years or so. So you want to make sure that you are still having fun and it's a part of the community that you want to be a part of. Then, of course, once you decide which schools have your negotiables that, you absolutely have to have, and the things that maybe not matter so much, you can start to pin down the schools that you're interested the most in. A campus visit, which might look a little different this year as well for seniors, because you might not physically be going to campuses. They have a lot of virtual options right now. I know a lot of campuses and universities are providing the virtual option to kind of do a walking tour of campus, to meet virtually with an admissions counselor. But those are the best ways to kind of feel that sense of belonging. If you feel like that is a good fit for you, seeing kind of maybe the student life that's active on campus, and even if you can't walk around it, I always say the best way of knowing is to just step foot on campus and kind of get a sense of the students there and the community. And that gives you a sense of if you belong or not. But the campus visit is very important. It's a great way to personally get to know the schools you're interested in, to meet with an advisor or an admissions counselor and get to know a little bit more about the personal things on campus. And of course, then diving deeper, the application process, which will come fall, what each school is looking for. Like I said, every school is different. So make sure that the schools you're interested in, you understand their application process. You understand what they look at, what they require, how they review you, what their deadlines are. If they have an early action, early decision, if they have a regular deadline, if they do rolling admissions, those are all very important, because that can, very much affect how you're reviewed at that institution. Then of course, the cost of attendance. So finding out maybe what the financial aid situations are, what the scholarships, if they do merit-based scholarships, if they have private scholarships, or if there's any other type of scholarships that you can apply for that would go towards your tuition, your room and board. And of course, affordability, like we mentioned, is another important factor. The scholarship opportunities, like I mentioned, and of course, if they're a part of the WUE program. And again, we'll discuss the WUE program a little bit further on, but if it's one of the states that participates in that, then that could, of course, alter your decision with affordability as well. So to select where you will apply. So mentioning those different schools that you have, don't put your eggs all in one basket. And I'm sure you've heard this a lot when it comes to don't just apply to one institution. So your safety school, that's where you would feel the most confident. That's where you feel like you would definitely probably have a good chance of getting accepted. You're a strong candidate for them, and it's within your affordability budget. So you looked into their scholarships, their cost of attendance, their cost of living for room and board and all of that. Then the good match school. So this is the school that meets those negotiables and those non-negotiables, the school that meets everything on your checklist almost to the most important factors. And then you potentially would meet their minimum admissions requirements. So you might be a good fit for them since they are a good fit for you. However, nothing is guaranteed, of course, in admissions world. But that would ideally be a school that might be a little bit more competitive than your safety school. And then, of course, your Reach Dream School. this is the one that maybe you've sought out, you thought about when you were younger, you thought this would be the school you're attending, or it's just a dream school in your mind. Like I know a lot of folks think of like Ivy League when it comes to this, but this is a school that maybe you're not as strong of a candidate for just because it's probably extremely competitive. They might not have a high acceptance rate, and they might have just a smaller campus in general. And then this one also tends to be that out of budget school. However, you still may apply to it because you never know when it comes to scholarships, you never know when it comes to cost of living or just getting accepted as well. That could mean probably about a 13% acceptance rate, or potentially it would be a little bit more out of budget. And I know for an example we've used in the past was like NYU. You would technically be academically prepared, but also schools that might not give out scholarships. So again, research is very important when it comes to your schools. We highly encourage to, research about 5 to 6 different schools when it comes to your application process, maybe apply to them. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. There's a cost when it comes to the application process. But again, we'll discuss that a little bit later on.
Okay, so now I am going to go over a really great tool for you to utilize to find and compare different schools. So you can go to www.bigfuture.collegeboard.org, and College Board isn't just for the SAT, it's actually used for a lot of different resources, and this is one of them. So you can search for colleges. So you can go to the website and click on the left side where it says search for colleges, or if you already have schools in mind, you can just search them by name. But once you do search for the schools, you can actually go and find them based on different filters. So you can actually, go to the location if you want a specific state or a type of school or a school size. So if you're looking for a large school, you can put large. If you want a smaller school, you can put small, public school, private school. There's a lot of different options. You can even put the different majors that you might be interested in, or if you want to double major. You can also put in the diversity. So if you're looking for in a Hispanic serving institution or HBCU, you can also put that in. So once you find schools, it'll look like this. So you'll see all the schools, you'll see the different options, and then you can actually compare the schools. So you can select the schools that you want to add and then just compare them. So this is what it looks like when you compare them. You can see that there's different campus sizes, and then it'll show you, where they're all located, if it's a public or private. So this is a really great tool to just utilize and kind of start doing your research on the different schools that's out there. And then once you go into more details of a school, it'll look like this. So you'll see you can find the deadlines here, and then you can find the size of the school, the retention rate, so the percentage of when students go back after their freshman year. You can see the graduation rate. So this is the University of Arizona, and then the graduation rate within 6 years is 65%. So you can actually search all the schools and it'll have this type of layout for you to utilize. So it's actually really easy, and we highly recommend using this to start your college search.
And both Kaylee and Lillian talked about large schools, small schools. And so just to kind of break that down so you can get an idea of what constitutes as a big school, we kind of put up some examples of what are larger institutions, but we always like to have the caveat when we throw out, oh, this is a large school, that sometimes you got to digest that a little bit. ASU is a really great example. We instantly go to that with, that's the biggest school in the country, which it is when you first look at that number. But when you really pull back the different layers of the onion, ASU has 5 different campuses. Some of those campuses are very small, and we're going to talk about what that is, and some are larger. So you can get a big feel, that energy of a campus with a really small environment. Also, Oregon State has a couple of different campuses. They have their main campus in Corvallis, and then of course their campus in Bend. And then Boise State and Alabama have one central campus where that number is composed of. So a bigger school, this may be the right fit for you, this might not be the right fit for you, but it is worth a look, and it is good to kind of put some numbers to that lingo a little bit. For medium-sized and small schools, this also helps put things into perspective. You've got the University of Idaho and University of Wyoming. We're both about 12,000 students, but we are a little more rural. Both of our campuses are, where maybe you want a campus that feels like your high school, that you're very used to. So Western Colorado State University or Eastern Oregon University fit that bill. The really important part is, as Kaylee talked about, is visiting the campus. I think sometimes we have a preconceived notion of, I can't do a big school, there's no way. And you walk onto that campus and you go, ah, yes, I get the energy, I like the feel, I like the diversity of the student body. This is really what's going to do my college the best thing that I can give it. Or you might walk on that bigger campus and go, you know what, no thank you, I think I need to look down a little smaller. But there are so many options in both those categories of large, medium, and small. It's great to look at those and kind of explore what fits the bill for you. That will also help develop your college list a little bit when you know where you're going to be successful.
Awesome. And so now we're going to transition a little bit to talk more about the Western Undergraduate Exchange, or WUE program, and out-of-state scholarships. So I guess first off, what is the WUE? So it stands for Western Undergraduate Exchange, and it was started around 1988 by the Western Interstate Commission of Higher Education. And so I will drop that link in the chat. And so it's kind of a lot of syllables just to basically say a reciprocity agreement between the Western states. So you have a reduced tuition, so you're not going to pay the full out-of-state tuition that you might pay, say, going from Washington to across the country like Florida or New York. It's across the 15 Western states. So you'll pay up to 150% of the in-state tuition. For example, if a school's tuition is $10,000, instead of paying in-state $10,000 or out-of-state $20,000, you pay kind of right in the middle around $15,000. So adding on 50% of what in-state students pay. It is not automatic, so we're going to go in a couple of slides just kind of showing the differences between different requirements for each school. But the best tip, one recurring thing you'll hear today is just talk to your admissions counselor, talk to the schools. We are a little bit different across the platform. In the Western states, though, there's about 150 different institutions that are participating, both four-year universities, colleges, and two-year community colleges as well. So looking at who participates, so we've got these 15 states here, and even though you see a state here, that does not guarantee that the school you want to go to in that state is participating. So once again, call your admissions counselor, call the school just to make sure they are participating. And then finally, a little bit about the overall cost of saving. So each year, about $380.5 million is saved. So that's money not being spent on extra fees going out of state. And about 40,000 students participate in the Western Undergraduate Exchange Program. So most students, or average number of students, save around $9,500.
Awesome. So kind of tagging on to what Alison was talking about, the WUE scholarship or the WUE program there's not one central application for it. And so unlike the Common App or the Coalition app, you can't go down the list and say, hey, all these schools participate in WUE, I'm going to check these boxes and automatically apply for it. So that WICHE website that was linked in the chat is a great resource to get started to see what schools may have this WUE program. And then just as Alison said, reaching out to the specific admissions counselors at each of those colleges to see what those requirements are, what their application looks like, because as you can see, WUE is provided directly through each college. Applying for the WUE can be a differing process depending on each university. So many colleges actually use the WUE as some sort of merit scholarship. So when you're looking at applying, look at if there's early deadlines. So is the admissions deadline different for in-state students versus out-of-state students? Do they have a specific WUE deadline that's different than their admissions deadline? Is it a first come, first serve program? So some schools actually only have 100 WUEs to give out. And so they are going to give them out first come, first serve, or they may have a deadline and pool everybody's applications and then decide from there. So maybe a more holistic approach. Do the colleges have a separate application? So some schools, even though you applied and maybe you meet their criteria, you may not be considered unless you complete that separate application. Other schools, you're automatically considered when you meet the admissions deadline, and we'll talk about some examples here in a second. I saw somebody ask as well, minimum GPA, SAT, ACT score requirements. Historically, a lot of schools have used this as that basis for the merit scholarship for WUE. So is there a minimum GPA? Is it guaranteed with that GPA and test score? Do you need both the GPA and the test score to receive the scholarship? You can see it can get pretty complicated, which once again, why it's important to reach out to your admissions representative. Some schools do have restrictions on majors or campuses. So for instance, Arizona State only offers the WUE program on particular campuses. And then University of Arizona specifically only offers the WUE program for students, upper division students pursuing mining, engineering, and natural resources. So you have to be pursuing those specific programs to qualify for the WUE scholarship there. With COVID-19, there's also a lot of questions and confusions around the online programs, and then some schools moving online, and if schools are still students are still eligible for the WUE program. Typically students who are taking online classes due to COVID-19, or even taking a few online classes during their time at the school, still qualify for WUE. But when in doubt, ask that admissions representative, because typically there are some specific online only programs that may not qualify for this WUE program. So here is just a handful of some of the schools that have WUE, and from this table, you can just see just a few of the differences. So every school does the WUE program differently, which is really the only commonality between us all. So on here, you'll see Boise State University. So the university I work for, you can see our requirements require a 3.3 cumulative unweighted GPA or higher, and an SAT of 1100 or an ACT of 22. What those requirements mean is if you meet those requirements and you get all your materials to us by December 15th, which is our non-resident application deadline, you're automatically guaranteed the scholarship. So there's no separate application. It's a guaranteed program. You meet the requirements, you meet the deadline, you get the money. So for our WUE program, if you qualify, you get it. And if that means that we give out 1 million WUEs that year, so be it. Now, another school, Montana State University, also has GPA and test score requirements, as well as a deadline, but you can see they do have a separate application. Additionally, you can see that asterisk by their deadline. It's because they have a first come, first serve program. So they encourage students, the sooner to apply for the WUE scholarship, the better. So even though they have that later deadline, it is not guaranteed. Students have those minimums to meet, and then they'll be able to roll out WUE awards after that deadline. So definitely a lot of different options. I'm going to pass it off to Adrian to finish out this table though.
Thanks. And a couple more examples. University of Wyoming, we actually have a scale. So we take your best test score, ACT or SAT, and your unweighted GPA, and where they coincide on a graph, you'll be guaranteed the WUE or maybe some other scholarship money. So it does vary, but you can see we go all the way until May 1st, and it's through your application for admission. And it seems as though we go down this example table, it gets a little easier. University of Hawaii If you have a 3.0 or higher, no test score, but you do need to fill out a separate application, you can get the WUE. And then Eastern Oregon University, you apply, you're getting that WUE. So this is a really great example to show you how so many WUE schools were the same but different. So you really want to do your research. I think if you leave with nothing else, knowing that you've got to ask a few questions about how the WUE is awarded, how you keep it, what you need to do, etc., will really kind of help lessen the stress later on in the spring when award packages come out, or when you're at that school and things, you get a letter saying, hey, why don't we have this piece of information to keep your WUE? So life favors the prepared, especially with WUE. So please do your research on that. Just a couple of things to remember. With the WUE, some of these do have a time limit. Most commonly, you're going to hear after 4 years, or you have 4 years to complete your degree, and then after that, the WUE ends. It can also be a number of credits. So it could be, depending on the institution, 120 credit hours to complete your degree program, and then WUE is done, or whatever the case may be. Again, a good question to ask that individual institution. Also, more often than not, students need to stay in good academic standing at the institution. Some schools will give you a specific GPA that you need to maintain to keep the WUE scholarship. We are a good example. You have to maintain a 3.0 to keep it. Students that dip below there's a possibility they can lose it. So again, we're pretty transparent with that information. That is not something we want to surprise you with, but it's good that you're finding out this information now. And then the big thing that we get a lot of students, they'll come to the institution on WUE and then want to become an in-state resident. This, because of how the program works, because it already is a significant discount, this time will not count towards residency if that state is one that takes longevity into consideration for in-state status. So just a few little tips to kind of keep in the back of your mind when you're applying, and especially when you're looking at different WUE institutions.
All right, so out-of-state scholarships. When it comes to looking at an institution, of course, the cost is one of the most important features. That's why we have been discussing with you WUE. However, out-of-state scholarships are different than the WUE program. On the sheet, I kind of give you a comparison of two schools, one being mine, University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, and another institution, University of California, the Davis campus. Scholarships are an important thing to look into with an institution, especially going out of state, because you might not be getting that in-state tuition, or they might not be a part of WUE. The reason I chose these two institutions is because both of them are not under the WUE program. So when it comes to out-of-state scholarships, there can be different bases of what they look for, how they grant them, the costs of their scholarships, especially for our out-of-state students. So that is another important thing to kind of compare when it comes to looking at institutions. So for instance, I put these two side by side to see how the scholarships are determined. So for both of them, they are automatically considered within admission. So if you get accepted to the institution, then the merit-based scholarships are automatically going to be considered. They are both merit-based. The one for UC Davis, it looks like it's more academic-based. As for the University of Minnesota, I know we do academic-based as well as a very holistic review too. So there's some other factors that are considered. With the merit-based for UC Davis, they look at extracurricular activities, they look at geographic origin, so where you're living in the country, specific college or major, so different colleges and majors might have more funding to allocate towards students that are getting accepted into those programs, so that can also differ versus university and colleges. And then it looks like they look at other personal characteristics, so they might do more of a holistic review too. For University of Minnesota Twin Cities, there's they look at grades. We look at the rigor of the academic course load for your high school. We look at the extracurricular involvement, and then we also do look at other personal characteristics. So there can be different things that these scholarships are based out of. The most important thing I can tell you as students is to ask your admissions counselor, ask the specific institution in which you are interested in attending, because they are going to be your best resource of finding out and trying to get pretty much the most bang for your buck when it comes to scholarships or the potential scholarships available. For instance, UC Davis, it looks like they grant out anything from 100 to 13,000 per year. It could actually range to, some of their scholarships are 2-year, 1 year versus all 4 years. I know personally, obviously from working at the university, at Minnesota only does 4-year scholarships. So if any of our out-of-state students are granting any scholarships, they're about 2,000 to 15,000, and those are each year for 4 years. So again, that's another thing to look at when it comes to an institution, is how long are the scholarships going to be available? What type of scholarships are available? And then of course, looking at anything that's not merit-based. Are there private scholarships available that you might have to apply for, that might come from an alumni department or a specific college that you're interested, or the major that you're interested in? So again, there are probably more ways than you know off the back of your hand of how to get funding for school. It's just working with that specific institution to figure out what opportunities they have available for you. And that gets us to the end of our presentation. So I will hand it back off to Brittany, but we want to thank you. And I'm going to actually provide our admissions arrow link in our chat on the right. So if you want to reach our director, our member directory through Arrow, you can contact us.
Awesome. Thanks, Kaylee. So we had some really good questions that came through the Q&A feature. But if you guys do have any questions about anything we covered today, we do have a few minutes. So if you want to ask those questions, we did have a couple questions privately that I did want to address. One of them regarding the WUE requirement table, and if there was somewhere you could find a table for all WUE schools with that kind of information listed out. Lillian added that College Board is a great resource to try to see some information. Also, the Witchy website that Alison had listed in the chat is a good starting point, but isn't always up to date. Every school can sometimes change their WUE requirements each year as well. And so sometimes that doesn't get updated all the time. So moral of the story, this whole presentation, reach out to your admissions representative that you're interested in each school and talk to them about what those WUE requirements are for each year. Adrian, I know you were looking at the chat and the Q&A. Did we have any other questions that came in?
We just got one about if you don't use WUE to attend an out-of-state college, is there a way to pay in-state or gain residency after that first year of paying tuition? So I think it'd be good if we all kind of addressed how we do residency. Perhaps that's a really great question. I'm probably a good one to start because I'm not a fun one. But Wyoming, we're a very difficult state to gain in-state residency. The reason is because we have the lowest in-state tuition in the country. So we make it kind of hard. It is more than longevity. The two most guaranteed ways to become a Wyoming resident are to join the National Guard or marry a Wyoming resident. Make good choices. But other than that, WUE is probably our most significant discount for our out-of-state students. So we would really encourage them to partake in that.
And I can go next because my Idaho is also very difficult to gain in-state residency. Similarly, Idaho in-state tuition is very low. To give perspective, the WUE program actually brings our out-of-state tuition for students on the WUE down to about the same price that it is to go to in-state Oregon and Washington. So Idaho in-state is pretty difficult to get. You have to be in Idaho for a reason other than education, which is how they get you, for a full year. So typically being on that WUE is going to save you the best and the most amount of money for that 4 years.
I can go. So in Arizona, it is also very hard to gain residency. It takes a year or 2 years, and you have to show that you plan on staying in the state of Arizona. You're registered to vote after graduation. So it's more than just for tuition purposes. So sometimes it's a lot to deal with just for in-state tuition. So sometimes it's just better for us, it's either WUE or merit scholarships. But we do work with students on case-by-case basis. So you'll have to contact our residency classification office. Sometimes families own homes in the state of Arizona for vacation homes, and they pay taxes, and that does not qualify for in-state. You have to actually live in the state of Arizona.
I guess I'll go as well. So University of Minnesota is not a part of the WUE program, and it's kind of similar. It's Minnesota, it's very hard to get in-state tuition unless your family moves there for reasons other than education. So the important things that they look at are pretty much tax information. They want to see if you're getting a job, you're getting income from somewhere in Minnesota, and if you're paying tax in the state, whether it's on a house or rent, and they'll look at like your driver's license. So it is pretty hard to get that in-state tuition unless your family is moving there, again, for those reasons that are different than the education purposes.
I guess super quick, Oregon's moderate. You just need to move into the state of Oregon and take less than 8 credits over the course of 1 year, and then you have residency.
Awesome. And I'm seeing a couple more questions coming through the chat. One person asked, if my parents moved to Washington and established residency, does that qualify? Adrian answered that saying, you encourage you to touch base with the schools in Washington that you're looking at to see what does qualify for that. Once again, that moral of the story, reach out to your admissions representative. Did we have any other questions that came through the Q&A that we wanted to answer live as well?
Yeah, another question, and this is a good clarifying question. So if I were to go to out of state, I have to use the WUE. What if the college is not in the West, but in the East or the South? Kaylee, you kind of touched on this. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so WUE is actually not available for schools in the East, the South, or typically most of the Midwest. There are only certain states, it's the Western states. So that actually wouldn't even be an option for you. So no, you would not have to use that. So that's where you're gonna look at those schools that you're interested in and see what kind of scholarship opportunities they have, what the financial aid looks like, as well as any opportunity for that extra funding since they are not a part of a WUE program.
And I would also add, just because a school is part of the WUE program doesn't mean that they also don't have other scholarships. So maybe you don't meet the WUE requirements, but that doesn't necessarily mean there aren't other scholarships for out-of-state students at that university. And so that is, once again, why it's important to reach out to the admissions representative. There's a lot of different opportunities out there beyond WUE, although WUE is a pretty sweet deal if you can tap into it.
And that does go into another question we got. If you apply for WUE, can you still apply for financial aid? And that's a universal yes. Definitely fill out that FAFSA. So there are many schools you can still apply for departmental scholarships, like Brittany was saying. So there is still other financial aid available outside of WUE, but WUE is usually a pretty significant we got one other question that they'd like to go out of state, but their family isn't sure that they would really like living out of state as much as the student thinks they would. How do they decide what is right for them?
I will hop in on this question. Oh, sorry, cut in front of Kaylee. I moved from LA to a small rural town in Oregon. I'd never been to Oregon. I'd never seen snow before. I had, typical city life to very rural, backcountry type camping stuff. there's a lot of things that you should be prepared for. Can you be financially stable if your family isn't willing to help you out by moving across state lines? Do you have some sort of support system there that'll help you outside of just finances, but emotional support, physical support? Just having those things in line. The second best tip I would give is visit the campus, see if you like the area, talk to students. But the first highest tip would just be do your research, find out what the area is like, what the state is like, do their politics align with your politics, and then are there certain things that you can give up moving from a city or rural area to vice versa.
Awesome. So it doesn't look like we have any other questions, so we'll go ahead and take this time to wrap up, but we want to thank you all for joining us today. There will be a recording of this presentation that you'll get an email about, as well as we highly encourage you all to reach out to us individually. If you have questions about this program, our specific institutions, please go to admissionsarrow.com, click our member directory, you'll see our faces, click our emails, we'll be happy to help you guys out. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you for joining.